The steady thrum of the rotor was John Mercer's only comfort. Up here, above the Oregon coast, the world was simple: wind, metal, and silence. Ranger, his German shepherd, always slept through these flights, curled up beside the seat like a co-pilot of habit. But not today. The dog suddenly stood, tail stiff, a low whine rising from his throat as he pressed his nose to the window. John frowned and banked the helicopter, the sea flashing silver beneath him. Then he saw it. 3 enormous letters carved into the sand between 2 black cliffs. SOS. Letters too perfect, too human, on a beach where no one lived. John hesitated, knowing that once he landed, peace would end, and something buried deep would finally surface. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The midday sun burned low over the Oregon coast, painting the ocean in shards of silver and heat. The air shimmered above the cliffs, and the wind carried the dry tang of salt and iron. Inside the olive-green UH-1 Huey, the steady rhythm of the rotor was the only sound that mattered. It filled the cockpit, vibrating through the metal and into the bones of the man at the controls. John Mercer, 55, sat straight but not rigid, one hand on the cyclic, the other resting loosely on his knee. His face was the kind that had forgotten how to smile without thinking about it first. Square-jawed, lined with years of salt air and harder memories. A silver stubble shadowed his chin, matching the streaks in his dark brown hair, now trimmed short but uneven. His eyes, pale blue and clear as Arctic water, carried the steady alertness of a man who once lived by discipline and survival instinct. He was a former Coast Guard pilot who had left the service 10 years ago, after losing his rescue partner in a storm mission that went wrong. Since then, the sound of a rotor blade had been both his punishment and his absolution. He flew alone now, contracted for civilian search and rescue work, charting the empty spaces between the living and the lost. Beside him, Ranger stirred. The dog was a 6-year-old German shepherd, powerfully built, but graceful in movement, his coat a mix of steel gray and deep sable that gleamed under the filtered sunlight. His eyes, amber and sharp, held a kind of human gravity. John often said Ranger had more sense than most people he'd known in uniform. The dog had been trained for canine rescue work, but had been retired early after shrapnel scars on his right hind leg made long chases impossible. With John, he had found a new rhythm, one that required patience, not pursuit. The flight was part of their weekly patrol. John preferred the stretch of coastline between Tillamook and Cape Meares, rugged, unwelcoming, and quiet. It was where the world went to disappear, and that suited him fine. The ocean below rolled with summer currents, its surface calm but deceptive. Somewhere under those gentle waves lay wrecks, forgotten stations, and the ghosts of calls that had come too late. Ranger was calm as always, chin resting on the edge of the seat, ears flicking to the rhythm of the rotor. Then, without warning, he stiffened. A low growl started in his chest, deep and uneasy. John's eyes flicked sideways. "What is it, buddy?" The dog pressed a paw against the window, gaze locked downward. John tilted the cyclic and banked the Huey slightly, following the dog's line of sight. Below, the cliffs opened into a narrow crescent of beach, wedged between 2 sheer walls of basalt. The tide was low, the sand pale and undisturbed, except for 3 enormous letters carved across it. SOS. He blinked. The letters were too symmetrical, too deliberate. They glinted faintly, as if made from something metallic. Scrap or foil, catching the sun. "That's no driftwood," he muttered. He glanced at Ranger, who was now whining softly, tail low, body tense. John circled once, studying the beach. No movement, no smoke, no wreckage. He clicked the radio. "Base, this is Mercer, South Sector Patrol, 10 miles west of Tillamook Head. I've got a possible distress signal at coordinates." Static hissed back. He adjusted the frequency. More static. The line was dead. "Damn it!" He brought the chopper lower. The downdraft whipped the sand into brief, ghost-like spirals as the skids touched down. The engine idled, blades chopping the wind in short, violent bursts. Ranger leapt down first, paws sinking into the soft sand. John followed, his boots crunching over the beach, hand instinctively brushing the holster on his side. Habit, not fear. The letters were massive, arranged from thin sheets of something metallic. Old solar panels, maybe, dulled and rusted at the edges. Around them, only emptiness. No campfire, no footprints near the tree line. Just one faint set of tracks leading toward the tide line and vanishing under the foam. John knelt, touching the metal. It was warm from the sun, not long exposed. "Someone built this recently," he murmured. Ranger sniffed at the edges, nose twitching, tail flicking uneasily. The dog moved toward the cliffs, ears pricked, then looked back at him, whining low. "Yeah, I feel it too," John said. Something about the silence pressed too hard. Even the gulls had vanished. He took out his old field camera, a Nikon scratched from years of service, and snapped a few quick shots. The sound of the shutter felt too loud. Then he pulled a small GPS from his vest and marked the coordinates. The habit of documentation never left him. Evidence was memory you could hold. As he turned back toward the helicopter, the breeze shifted. The metallic letters shimmered briefly, as if sighing in relief. Then a long wave crept up the sand and dragged across them. The panels clattered softly, and when the water receded, half of the S was gone. John stood frozen, watching the ocean erase the message in real time. It felt deliberate, almost intelligent. Back in the cockpit, he sat in silence for a long moment before speaking, his voice rougher than usual. "No signal, no flare, no debris, but you saw it too, didn't you?" Ranger gave a soft chuff, settling beside him. The dog's eyes stayed fixed on the receding shoreline, as if still searching for something. John lifted the Huey back into the air. The sea stretched endlessly below, blue and innocent, but he couldn't shake the image, the precision of the letters, the absence of people, the speed with which the ocean had swallowed the plea. He set a waypoint in his flight log and turned north. Yet his hands hesitated on the controls, and for the first time in years, he felt that old pulse of unease, the same one that had gripped him the night his partner went down in the storm. The gut feeling that said, "You're not done here." The wind rose suddenly, rattling the frame. Ranger barked once, sharp and short, as if echoing a command only he understood. John glanced down through the glass floor panel, expecting to see only waves and rock. Instead, for a split second, he thought he saw a faint shimmer beneath the surface. 3 more letters forming, glowing, and then gone. He blinked hard, the reflection vanishing into the blue. "Probably the sun," he muttered, but his hand was already moving, setting a course back to that same beach for the next day's tide. Whatever message had been carved there was not finished, and deep down, John knew someone or something was still calling. The following morning broke gray and windless, the kind of stillness that made the coastline feel like it was holding its breath. John Mercer had not slept. He had replayed the previous day's discovery a dozen times. The SOS glinting under the sun, the vanishing footprints, the ocean swallowing its own secret. He'd seen strange things before, but something about that message felt personal, as if someone had written it for him alone. Ranger paced restlessly on the hangar floor, nails clicking on concrete, eyes flicking toward the helicopter door every few seconds. The dog was tense, his instincts humming. John knew that feeling well. He fueled the Huey, checked the rotors, and took off again, tracing the same coordinates as yesterday. The beach looked different under the clouded light, duller, more desolate. He hovered low before setting down. Ranger leapt from the cabin first, tail level, nose to the sand. The dog's movement was purposeful, zigzagging through the tide line, then suddenly halting near the cliffs. John followed, boots sinking into damp grit. Half buried in the sand was a torn backpack, its fabric stiff with salt. Inside, he found a broken camera, lens cracked and body dented, the strap still damp. A small field notebook was wedged inside a plastic pouch, its edges curled and the ink smudged by seawater. The first few pages were filled with diagrams, tidal patterns, magnetic field readings, coastal coordinates, but the handwriting on the final entry froze him. "If I'm right, the signal isn't coming from people." Signed beneath it, in neat letters, Dr. Lauren Pike. He read the name again. It sounded faintly familiar. He had once read an article by a young oceanographer with that surname, something about electromagnetic anomalies near deep-sea vents. She'd been praised for her brilliance, the kind of scientist who ignored politics and funding in pursuit of data. He remembered the photograph from the article, a woman in her 30s, slim and pale, with sunburnt cheeks and a tangle of dark red hair, smiling awkwardly beside a research buoy. The kind of person who belonged to the sea more than to people. John looked at the line again. "Not from people." His brows furrowed. That wasn't the language of desperation. It was the language of discovery. But if she had written this before she vanished, then what was she studying out here, alone, in one of the roughest stretches of coast in the Pacific Northwest. He packed the notebook carefully into his vest, scanning the cliffside. Something gleamed faintly, a scrap of metal lodged between two rocks. When he pulled it free, he saw the faint emblem of a trident. Navy property, decades old. "Ranger," he said softly, and the dog came trotting back, muzzle dusted with sand. The shepherd whined, staring seaward. The tide was coming in fast now, dragging away any trace of the SOS letters. John felt a cold, irrational chill, like watching a grave close itself. Bekwasar. In the air, he called the Coast Guard dispatch tower in Tillamook. The operator on duty, Officer Mike Donnelly, answered in his usual slow drawl. Mike was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, ex-military too, with a crooked nose and the patience of a saint. "You said Lauren Pike?" he repeated after John's report. "No records of any distress call from that name, and no missing persons filed in Oregon this week. You sure it's not one of your ghost cases again, John?" John didn't rise to the bait. Mike liked to joke that John attracted hauntings, the kind that left no bodies, only questions. "I've got a name, coordinates, and a bag full of gear. Someone was out there." "Well, I'll run it past the regional station, but if it's Navy-related, you might be stepping into restricted waters," Mike warned. "You know how those contracts go. They lose a buoy, blame a storm, and call it classified." The line crackled and went dead mid-sentence. John frowned, adjusting the frequency, but all he got was static. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricking. The hum in the radio changed. Subtle, rhythmic, 3 short pulses, 3 long, 3 short again. SOS. He stared at the transceiver. "That's impossible," he muttered. The signal was clean, strong, coming from the same direction as the beach. He tried to triangulate, flipping between channels. The frequency was military, 406 MHz, reserved for encrypted emergency beacons. No civilian could access that band. Ranger began whining, tail low, pressing his body against the pilot's seat. John glanced at the clock. 21:47. The signal pulsed again, then stopped, replaced by a long, low tone like a breath drawn through metal. Then silence. He sat there, staring into the darkness ahead. The night sky over Tillamook was clear, the stars sharp as ice chips. The ocean beneath looked calm, but every instinct screamed that something waited under that stillness. He closed the notebook on his lap, the inked words flashing in his mind. "Not from people." John reached for the ignition, his voice low. "All right, buddy. One more flight." The Huey roared to life, its rotors cutting through the quiet. Ranger braced against the wind, eyes locked on the horizon as they lifted into the dark. The coastline unfolded below like a secret map, jagged, shifting, alive. As they neared the coordinates again, the radio flickered back on. Through the static came a woman's voice, faint and shaking, as if from underwater. "If anyone hears this, stay away from the cove." The words faded, swallowed by static. Ranger growled. John tightened his grip on the cyclic. His reflection stared back from the windshield, pale and determined, lit by the dim red glow of the instruments. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath them, and somewhere ahead, the truth waited, something neither man nor dog could yet name. The night was sharp and breathless, the kind of darkness that seemed to drink sound from the air. John Mercer sat in the dim glow of the hangar's sodium lights, the Huey's blades motionless above him. He had spent the last hour pacing between the radio and the cockpit, replaying the woman's voice through static. "If anyone hears this, stay away from the cove." Every time he turned the dial, the transmission vanished, as though the sea itself was choosing when to speak. Ranger lay near the hangar door, head lifted, ears twitching at the distant crash of waves. The dog had barely moved all evening. His stillness had its own gravity. When John finally strapped himself into the pilot's seat, Ranger stood immediately, as if the decision had been mutual. He flew low along the Oregon coast, the world beneath him reduced to a black mirror. The moon hung white and cold, scattering silver across the swells. Inside the cockpit, the red dashboard light carved his face into planes of focus and exhaustion. The steady beat of the rotor blended with the hollow pulse in his chest. He told himself it was just curiosity, professional instinct, but he knew that wasn't true. Something deeper was pulling him back. Half an hour into the flight, the radio crackled. It wasn't the same SOS pattern. This one was stranger, rhythmic but uneven, like breathing. He adjusted the frequency. The sound deepened, vibrating through the hull until even Ranger whimpered. "It's okay, boy," John murmured, though his own stomach felt heavy with dread. On the radar, a faint echo blinked 5 miles east of Haystack Rock. Open water, no islands, no ships. He banked toward it. Fog began to form along the surface, dense and luminous under moonlight. Through it, the water looked alive, rippling with faint streaks of blue light, like lightning trapped beneath the waves. He recognized it. Bioluminescent algae, common in summer, but never this bright. The signal's strength surged as he descended to 300 feet. "Base, this is Mercer," he said into the mic. "Reading unknown signal source at coordinates." Static erupted, the radio shrieking with distortion, and the controls shuddered as the compass needle spun in circles. He steadied the stick. "What the hell?" The altimeter jumped, then froze. The Huey's engine coughed, dropped RPM, recovered. Ranger barked once, bracing his paws. A sudden flash below drew John's eyes downward. For a fraction of a second, the fog thinned, and he saw it. A shape beneath the surface, long and metallic, like the hull of a submarine but broken, half buried in silt. A tower structure jutted from it, faintly glowing from inside. Then the fog closed again. "Lauren Pike," he whispered, remembering the note. "The signal isn't from people." He circled once, marking coordinates manually since the GPS had gone blank. Then the light below flickered out, replaced by the steady pulse of an SOS again, louder now, insistent. He pushed the chopper forward, following the rhythm. The radar pinged once more, and a new contact appeared, not below, but behind. "Unidentified aircraft, 40 degrees, said a voice through the static, clipped, masculine, official. "You are entering restricted airspace. Identify immediately." John's blood went cold. "This is civilian craft November 7-2 Huey on coastal patrol. No restricted zones on this grid." No response, just the distant thump of another rotor. Then a light flared in the mist. A second helicopter, matty black, closing fast. He knew the design. A military-issue Bell 412, unmarked, running cold. "Ranger, hold on!" he shouted, as tracer rounds splits the fog ahead, bright orange streaks that vanished into the sea. He yanked the collective, pulling altitude hard. The Huey strained, blades slicing wet air, engine howling. They burst above the fog line into clear moonlight. The pursuing aircraft followed, its spotlight cutting across their tail. John twisted into evasive maneuvers, diving back toward the coastline. Bullets clanged off the fuselage, a high, metallic scream. Ranger barked in fury, his body braced against the seat. John dropped altitude again, hugging the contour of the cliffs, using terrain as cover. Years of combat training returned like muscle memory, instinct sharper than fear. For a moment, silence. Then the black helicopter peeled away, disappearing back into the mist. He leveled the Huey, heart hammering. The ocean stretched beneath, calm again, the glow gone. Whatever he'd seen under the waves was hidden now. Back at the hangar, John shut down the engine and sat for a long time in the cockpit, the rotor ticking as it slowed. His hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of questions. Who was flying that unmarked craft? Why guard a dead zone off the coast? And what had Lauren Pike discovered that made someone broadcast warnings in her name? He pulled the notebook from his vest, flipping through to the last page. Beneath the faint ink stains there was a second layer of writing, barely visible, numbers written in pencil, coordinates, and one word, Keller. He didn't remember seeing it before. Ranger pressed his head against John's shoulder, a quiet gesture that steadied him. "Yeah, I know," John whispered. "We're going back." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of salt and oil. The tide was rising again, and somewhere beyond the cliffs, an unseen signal pulsed beneath the waves, steady as a heartbeat. The fog had thickened into a living wall, swallowing sound and distance. The Huey searchlight sliced through the haze, revealing fragments of whitecaps and scattered debris. John Mercer leaned forward, squinting at the faint shape ahead, what looked like the hull of a small ship stranded on black rock. His heart quickened. Ranger stood braced on the cabin floor, tail stiff, eyes bright with alert focus. "There she is," John muttered, lowering the throttle. The helicopter descended, the downdraft sending waves crashing against the wreck. The vessel was a research trawler, no longer than 30 feet, its hull marked Odyssey 2. Paint peeled from its sides, the name half obscured by salt and algae. The deck was scarred, railings bent inward as if by collision. John touched down on the nearest patch of rock and cut the engine. The sudden silence pressed hard. The ocean's pulse filled the void, deep and slow. Ranger jumped down first, nose to the wind, ears cocked toward the ship. John climbed aboard, boots slick on algae. "Hello?" he called. No answer, only the creak of metal against rock. Then a sound, a faint, irregular tapping, like metal hitting metal. He followed it to the aft cabin. Inside, the air smelled of oil, rust, and something faintly medicinal. Instruments lined the walls, many shattered, but at the center of the chaos stood a transmitter, its indicator light flickering weakly. "Jesus," John breathed. The machine was still broadcasting, an SOS loop on the same encrypted frequency. He crouched beside it, tracing the wires, and froze. The signal was being manually rerouted. Someone was still alive. From the shadows behind a fallen panel came a voice, cracked but steady. "Don't touch that." John turned sharply, his hand instinctively going for the emergency flare gun at his belt. A woman stepped into the light. She was in her mid-30s, tall and thin from weeks of strain. Her face was pale beneath the grime, the cheekbones sharp, lips chapped. Her hair, a tangled mix of red and chestnut, hung damp against her shoulders. But her eyes, green as sea glass, were alive with defiance. She held a wrench loosely, though her arm trembled from exhaustion. "Dr. Lauren Pike, I presume," John said quietly. She nodded once, lowering the wrench. "Who are you?" "John Mercer, civilian pilot. I picked up your signal." "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "They'll come back." John helped her to the deck, noticing the cuts on her hands, the blood seeping through a torn sleeve. "Who?" Lauren sank against the railing, her breath shaking. "We were studying an anomaly, something under the seabed near Haystack Ridge, a magnetic pulse repeating every 90 seconds. It mimicked SOS, but it wasn't from any human source. We thought it might be a machine, an old relay station or substation, but then we found a structure, too deep, too precise." "What kind of structure?" John pressed. She looked at him, eyes hollow. "It was built, John, that's all I can say. We tried to record it, and that night 3 boats appeared. No flags, no IDs, men with masks. They said we'd breached restricted waters. They shot our engines, took our data drives, and left us adrift. I barely made it here." John exhaled slowly. "And the others?" Her expression said the rest. Ranger whined, pawing the deck. From somewhere behind the ridge came a low rumble, distant rotors. Lauren's face went white. "They're back." John ran to the cockpit and flipped the Huey's ignition. "Get in," he shouted. Ranger bounded aboard first. Lauren followed, clutching the console as the chopper lifted through the fog. Below, 2 black helicopters skimmed the waterline, their searchlights stabbing through mist. Tracer rounds ripped through the air, orange arcs reflected in the spray. John banked hard left, the Huey lurching. "Hold tight," he barked. Ranger growled, braced on the floor. Lauren screamed as the side window shattered, shards slicing the air. John dropped altitude sharply, hugging the coastline. The enemy craft split, one circling ahead to cut them off. John's eyes flicked between radar and terrain. He spotted a narrow ravine, a natural canyon carved into the cliffs. "If we're lucky, they won't risk the rock walls," he muttered. He plunged the Huey into the gap, the rotor tips skimming within feet of stone. The chase lights faded behind them for a moment. Then came a deafening explosion, a misjudged missile striking the cliff face. Fire bloomed in the fog like sunrise. John burst out over open sea again, smoke trailing from the Huey's tail. He could feel the shudder of damage beneath his hands. "We can't stay up long," he said. Lauren's voice shook. "There's an old Navy radar station due north, Cape Meares. My team transmitted coordinates there before." "Before they found you?" John finished grimly. He angled north. Behind them, one of the pursuing helicopters climbed through the smoke, still following. "Why protect this? What are they hiding?" he asked. Lauren's voice was faint but certain. "Because whatever's under that ridge wasn't built by us, and someone wants it kept that way." The Huey skimmed over black waves, the shoreline drawing closer. Smoke curled from the fuselage. Sparks danced along the damaged panel. Ranger pressed his head against John's leg, steady and silent. Ahead, through the thinning fog, the broken silhouette of the radar tower emerged against the moonlight, an old guardian waiting in the dark. The Cape Meares radar station stood like a forgotten skeleton on the cliff's edge, its steel tower groaning in the wind. Rusted satellite dishes pointed blindly toward the ocean, relics of a war that ended long before John Mercer had learned to fly. The storm had passed, but fog still clung to the coastline like smoke. John guided the damaged Huey down beside the crumbling concrete pad, the landing skid screeching. The rotor slowed to a whine. Ranger jumped out first, sniffing the air with suspicion, tail low but steady. Lauren Pike stumbled after him, clutching her side where blood had dried into her torn jacket. Under the cold fluorescent glow of the cockpit, her features looked sharper, green eyes haunted but focused, skin pale against streaks of salt and grime. She'd lost much of her calm scientist's composure, replaced now by a hardened clarity. The woman who once studied currents and signals had become someone else, someone running out of time. John helped her down, his hands firm but gentle. "You said your team sent data here. How?" Lauren pointed toward a half-buried steel door under the tower. "There's a data relay bunker below ground. The Navy decommissioned it years ago, but the satellite uplink should still function. We piggybacked the signal weeks ago before—" She hesitated. "Before the attack." They forced the door open with a metal bar. The hinges screamed. Inside, the air was thick with dust and oil. They descended a narrow stairwell until the darkness broke into a chamber filled with old equipment, rows of monitors, blinking amber lights, and a single mainframe still humming. The sound of it, a mechanical heartbeat, made Lauren exhale in relief. "It's alive!" John swept a flashlight across the room. On a nearby bench sat a man, thin, unshaven, wrapped in an old Navy jacket. He was in his late 40s, with wiry gray hair and the tense, restless hands of someone who had lived too long with fear. His name tag read E. Keller. His eyes flicked up at them, wary but not surprised. "You brought her back," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. Lauren froze. "Evan?" He nodded. "They told me you were dead." Evan Keller was one of the engineers who had worked with Lauren's research group, a specialist in marine electromagnetic systems. He had vanished during the attack. Now he looked like a man who had been living underground for days, maybe weeks, feeding on canned rations and adrenaline. "I tried to warn you," he rasped. "Blue Wave's not just a company. They bought the Navy's old test sites. The signal you found, it's the core of their prototype reactor." John frowned. "Reactor?" Evan tapped a dusty monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing a sonar image of the ocean floor, a mass of metal ridges and cables forming a perfect spiral, glowing faintly in false color. 20 years ago, the Navy tried to harness tidal energy using a nuclear pulse drive. The experiment failed. They buried it beneath Haystack Ridge and erased the records. But Blue Wave rediscovered it and rebuilt it as a private energy source. Cheap, unlimited, unstable. Lauren's voice trembled with anger. "You knew this. You worked for them." "I worked to shut it down," Evan snapped. "But once they realized the core could self-generate through magnetic compression, they silenced everyone who knew too much, including me." He rubbed a scar along his jaw, a knife wound, half-healed. "The signal isn't a call for help, John. It's a distress system from the reactor's AI, warning that the containment field is failing. In less than a week, the seabed could collapse." John stepped back, absorbing the weight of it. "So, we're sitting on a bomb." "Exactly." Evan turned to Lauren. "We can still expose them. The data node here connects to the satellite relay. Send the core's telemetry to federal servers. They can't erase that." Lauren limped to the console and inserted the portable drive from her coat. Screens blinked alive, data streams filling the monitors. Ranger lay near the stairwell, head resting on his paws but eyes fixed on the doorway. He growled softly. John's instincts flared. Headlights flared outside, faint through the bunker's narrow vent. Then came the crunch of boots and the low thrum of engines. Lauren's fingers froze over the keyboard. "They found us." Evan grabbed a pistol from a crate. "2 jeeps, maybe 3. We have minutes." John sealed the hatch and slammed a breaker switch. The radar tower above roared to life, its beacon flaring bright. "Send it now," he said. Bullets hammered the door. Sparks rained from the hinges. Lauren hit upload. The progress bar crawled. 62%, 78%, 90%. The old machine screamed as if alive, lights flickering under the strain. Almost, the door burst inward. 2 armed men stormed in, faces masked. Evan fired once, the sound deafening. One man fell, the other raised his rifle, until Ranger launched forward, jaws clamping on his arm. John wrenched the gun away and threw a punch that cracked bone. "Done!" Lauren shouted. "It's gone!" She ripped a red lever from the console, the self-destruct failsafe she'd installed earlier. Time to erase everything else. They ran for the stairs as the first explosion rippled through the floor. The bunker shook violently, dust raining from the ceiling. John shoved Lauren ahead, Ranger sprinting beside them. Firelight bloomed behind them as they reached the surface and dove behind the Huey. A second explosion followed, the radar tower collapsing in a shower of sparks that lit the cliff like dawn. They flew north through the smoke. Below, the cliff burned like a beacon against the sea. Lauren sat in silence, her face streaked with tears and soot. Evan was gone. He hadn't made it out. John didn't speak. Ranger rested his head on her lap, steady and calm, grounding them. Both. 3 days later, the headlines broke. Blue wave under federal investigation for illegal nuclear experimentation. Lauren's name was cleared. The sea was silent again. At dusk, John flew alone over Tillamook Bay, the world washed in gold. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes half closed, content. John's reflection in the glass looked older, but lighter somehow. Sometimes, he said softly, a distress signal doesn't call for rescue, it calls for conscience. The Huey banked toward the horizon, disappearing into the light. When all the noise fades and the sea goes quiet again, there is a moment that feels almost divine. The kind of stillness where you realize something greater has been watching all along. John Mercer didn't call it a miracle, but maybe it was. He had seen machines fail, men fall, and the sea swallow everything in silence. Yet somehow, life had handed him one more dawn. Sometimes God doesn't part the waters or silence the storm. Sometimes he sends a small sign, a pulse in the dark, to remind us that faith still reaches further than fear. And maybe that's the real miracle, that in a world full of chaos, we can still choose to listen, to answer a call for help, even when no one else does. Like John, we all have our signals, the people who need our attention, the moments that test our conscience, the quiet voice that asks us to do what's right when no one is watching. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Leave a comment about what you believe miracles look like in your own life, and subscribe so you can keep walking with us through these stories of faith, courage, and redemption. May God bless you, keep you safe, and remind you, even in the darkest fog, His light still finds its way through.